Hi, and welcome to this week's lectures. The aim here is to introduce you to a different type of loop. So far, we looked at for loops, and the idea of a for loop is that you had a very predictable number of times you would go around the loop. So if we think of a loop, right, you enter the loop, and you essentially just keep on going around, repeating, some conditions change, and you do a number of different things. With for loops, you can predict and control the number of times it goes around the loop. So typically you have things like for I in, you have a range statement which controls a number of times it will go around the loop. Or you can have for I in and have a list object here, and depending on the number of list objects you can say that this loop is going to repeat 4 or 5 times, 6 times, 3 times. So for example, here's a typical loop. So here's a loop with a list in it. I'm going to pick each item out of this, each number out of a list, and the list has 4 numbers in it. Okay, so if I do a print statement, you can, without having to execute that code, know that that loop is going to go round 4 times. It's going to pick each one and go round it. Let's have a quick run of this, and actually we should save this. We are in week 12. Bear with me a second. So it's notes 12a. Okay, so let's run file a script. Let's run our main and have a quick look. And if I type it in correctly, it would help. There we go, 4 times. Relatively straightforward. Another obvious mechanism is you use a range statement, and the for with a range statement, if I just put a number 4 in there, it will tell me how many times I'm going to go around a loop. So let's just quickly run it. And if I run main, okay, so if you're unsure about for loops, go back to the previous week and practice those. Now, there are different kinds of loops. So let's just come back to our concept here. So that's a for loop. For loop, it's controlled number of times you're looping. Okay, now that's one type of loop. Another loop is this type of logic. I'm just going to loop if this condition here is true. As long as that condition is true, we haven't worked out what it is, carry on looping. So repeat this segment of code and whatever's inside that loop. Okay, now this type of loop, when the condition is true, could repeat itself 20 times, 2 times, 6 times, different numbers of times. Up front, you cannot tell, depending on the activity inside the loop and what leads into the loop, you can't tell how many times it's going to loop. But what you can do is you can set out what the conditions are to allow it to loop. So let's just kind of clarify that idea. What do I mean when I say loop if the condition is true? Well, we don't use the word loop. We use the word while. So the word while in programming language is like the ordinary understanding of loop something if some condition is true. We say while, and in the bracket we put the condition. Now if the condition we put inside here is true, we will loop, and we'll carry on the code which is inside the loop. Then we'll come back and round we go. So let's do the most basic one, a loop that never stops. Okay, so we're going to loop, and we are going to have a loop that has no stop. So consider this. Okay, have a look at that code. It says while true. And what's that saying? Well, that's the condition. If that condition is true, it will loop. But if it's true, it will always loop. So what it will do is forever just keep on repeating this line. Let's demonstrate it. Hopefully won't crash our software. We'll have to interrupt it artificially. And while true, name error global true. Oh, yes. Here's an observation. Notice it says the word true is not defined. True has to be capitalized. That's easy to forget because in different languages, true can be lowercase. So true and false, when you use them, have to be capitalized. Let's run it again. And let's see. Will it stop? No. Do you notice it's just going to carry on? So while I talk, it's stuck in an infinite loop. Constantly remain true. So the way that you control this type of looping is not by doing a count. If you want to count something and say loop only 3 times, you use, as we've said before, you use a for loop, right? If you want to count how many times you want to loop, then use a for loop. But if you don't want to count a for loop and you want to just count if a condition is true, you use the while loop down here. So look, there we are, it's still going, and it will go on until the last atom on the planet Earth, until the sun basically gets big enough, turns into a red giant, or we run out of electricity. Right? It's not going to ever stop. So that's called an infinite loop, and you may find use of that. But let's just create a very simple condition. Okay, now watch how I do this. I'm going to declare a flag, and I'm going to set it for true. And I'm going to say if the flag is true, and the way that I write it, and again I haven't capitalized true, so it's going to complain, right? I'm going to say if the flag is true. Now, what's nice about programming, let's get rid of this for a minute. What's nice about programming is if you're checking for something to be true and you don't actually have to put that in, that's exactly the same as saying while flag. Because what that says is, what's the value of flag? It's true. While it's true, carry on looping. So let's say inside our loop, we're going to store a value, receive a value, which is going to be an integer, and we are going to ask for input and say, please enter an integer inside my loop. You enter the integer, and then you ask a question. If that integer I is greater than 10, then we're going to turn our flag to false. Only under that condition. Now, what do you think is going to happen in this code? Write it, test it before I run it. So we set an initial value as true. We'll only run this if the flag is true. Inside the loop, we're going to ask, give me a number. And we're going to say straight after, well, if it's greater than 10, turn the flag false. Well, let's have a look. It's easier to demonstrate this than it is. Bear with me a second. Let me just get run file script. Oh, wait a minute. Let me just save. Right, cancel that. Save quickly. And no shell to run. Oh, I've got rid of my shell, and stupidly it was complaining, so ignore that. Right, run file as script. It's fine, it's just loading it up. Give it a second. Okay, so there are no typos. Let's run main. So what we expect is it asks me a question. Now, where is this question being asked? Inside the loop. So we've already entered the loop because we set that flag to true. So let's enter a simple number. Let's say, let's go back there. Let's say 2. Please enter a number 2. So if I keep on adding numbers or entering numbers and they all remain below 9, no, if I enter 10, now remember the condition here is if it's greater than 10. So if I enter 10, do we expect it to stop? No, we don't. But if I enter 11, it stops. Actually, it complains. And what does it do? It says that flag is false, global name. And if you notice, I did the same typo. It didn't spot it straight away. That should be capital for false. Okay, now run your code as I'm doing now, and notice that any number below or including 10, it will just carry on forever, right? Well, I just entered 45 very, very quickly and it stopped. Let's run it again. So 4, 5, 6, 3, 6. That's too big. Let's just hit enter. 5. Right, let's do a number greater than 10. It stops. So that now brings out a feature of this type of loop. If the condition for this loop to continue is entirely to do with some question you ask inside it, and you can't predict up front what the user might put in, you could run this loop 5,000 times before it stops, twice before it stops. So here we use this type of condition when we don't know when or how many times, and we can't control the number of times. I can't say you only have 10 goes to enter an integer. I want to give the freedom for my user to enter as many times as possible.